Hey everybody, it's Rajesh here.
Intane here.
Welcome to our podcast, Baskets of Knowledge, Chats with a Difference. In our podcast, we invite guests from around the country and around the world to talk about how they got to where they're at the moment. It's about a journey, it's about an experience, it's about their life. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Baskets of Knowledge. Hopefully you've all been well, happy, healthy, and putting something into your basket of knowledge. Tane, what did you put into your basket of knowledge since we last spoke?
Yeah, I think probably two learnings that I've had over the last week. I think the first one has been to just celebrate the small wins. On Tuesday, I went to I've been obviously trying to get back into the gym, and Tuesday it was a pretty mediocre session, and I was pretty frustrated at the results. But I think after I got home and had dinner, I kind of reflected on it, and I guess I realized that yes, it wasn't the most productive session, but probably a month, 2 months ago, I wasn't motivated to go to the gym or to be physically active. So instead of having that mindset of it was a waste of time, or having those negative, I guess, thoughts, trying to flip that narrative to go, actually, it's a huge win to be, pushing myself to go back and get into the gym and to get back into that physical activity space. And I think the other learning that I've had over the last week has just been that the power of your inner voice, and just realizing that you have to be the one to challenge yourself. I think the last couple of months, yes, I've had a lot of change in my life and a lot of challenges along the way, but that doesn't mean that I can't challenge myself to, step outside of the comfort zone and to start getting to where I want to be. So I think just, having that internal conversation to go, yes, it's nice to have, a sense of comfort, and that's always going to be there, and you can always lean into it, but also, having that power to have that internal, I guess, challenge and drive for yourself, which isn't always as easy to do.
Yeah, beautiful. And I thank you for sharing that. And I love that because the two are actually interrelated. If you think about it, both of them are linked to your inner voice. The inner voice that you've told yourself about the gym, and the inner voice you told about, those comfort zones. So some beautiful lessons. And I think this is something that all of us do. We have those inner voices, those inner critics, those a lot of us have inner critics, and our inner champions are the ones that we don't really bring out often because we're like, oh no, we shouldn't. But actually, it's the one we need to bring out, our inner champion. But our inner critic is the one that goes, yo, I'm here, and takes over. So yeah, it's awesome, and I look forward to seeing what happens over the next few weeks with that conversation. And my learning is, I have started rereading the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. If you have not read that book, I would highly recommend it. It's one of my all-time favorite books. It's not really a book; it's just just quotations, really. And there's one quote that really stood out for me. I was reading it this morning, and it goes like this. It goes, "If you want to make the wrong decision, ask everyone." And I thought about that, and I was like, yeah, how many times do we need validation from a lot of people before we actually take a step into anything that we do? Instead of just finding the one or two people that will say, hey, this is the way you should do things, or yeah, this is right or wrong. But we always try and negate that, whether it's doing another course, whether it's doing another speaking gig, whether it's whatever it is, we try and ask everyone and end up doing nothing, and end up making the wrong decision. Because again, if we tie back to you, Tana, your inner critic and inner champion is being silenced by everyone else. So yeah, that's my learning. But hey, it's not about me, it's not about Tane. As always, we scour the country, we scour the world to find some interesting people, and we think and we know everyone is interesting. And if we could do this all day, every day, we would. Watch out, Joe Rogan, here we come. But not for now. And this week, we're really privileged and honored to have a guest who I've been really privileged to get to know really well in such a short amount of time. And I'm going to tell you a bit of a backstory. So again, LinkedIn, for those of you that follow us now, LinkedIn is where I live and I play. And our guest was on LinkedIn, and I loved what they were posting on LinkedIn. And I was like, oh, this is a person that I really want to connect with and meet. So I dropped them a message, and I was like, hey, I'd love to catch up with you. And they were like, yep, cool, let's make a plan. Da 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 da. And life happens, and we didn't make the plan. And then one day I went to a training, and there she was right there in front. She was the person that was signing up, and I was like, well, what are the chances? And that was when I realized this was a person that was pretty epic, because what they said to me really reigns true. They were like, make the most of this weekend and go play full out. And that's been something that's resonated. And ever since then, the connection has been really cool and really awesome. And this is why I wanted to bring them on to this podcast here because they've got an amazing story to share and tell. So, without further ado, welcome to our podcast, Vicki Tyler. Kia ora and welcome.
And thank you for having me. This is a real treat and a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
No worries, Vicky. For people who know nothing about you, who is Vicky today on the 17th of August, 2025?
Okay, so snapshot. I am in Mount Eden in Auckland. I'm a mum of a 17 and a 19-year-old boys, married to an American. So I am a dual New Zealand US citizen and with a couple of hybrid sons. And we have been living up in LA for the last, well, was up there for 20 years where I met my husband and came back to New Zealand during COVID for 1 year because it was a little bit cray-cray up in the USA. I know it was bad everywhere. And the schools were shut down for a year and a half up there. So we decided to go for a year and just ask the kids what they thought. And they hit the ground running. And so now New Zealand is home. So I have sort of had to work out, well, what am I going to do here? And so I've sort of left behind what I was doing in the States and went back to uni, did a graduate diploma in applied psychology to add to a couple of other pillars that I already had to start my business.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing. This is just a snapshot of who you are at this point in time. But if we think about what you've just said there, 20 years in the United States and then you move back to New Zealand, what is that like for you as Vicky had to shift to identity from what you developed in the States and shifting, as you said before, to refine yourself as who you are right now? What is that like for you?
Yeah, it's been like quite fascinating. What I will tell you that I was so pleasantly I don't know why I say surprised, but that's the word that comes to mind. That I'd always known that Kiwis were really nice, but coming back, it's not just a couple of Kiwis, like Kiwis are really good people. So we all hit the ground running and just felt really at home really quickly. And when it came to when we were going to be here for a year, I had decided to immerse myself really heavily into volunteering and for different sporting codes for the most part. Always been involved in surf life saving, and then my boys were playing a couple of different sports. And so I was just put my sort of volunteer hat on, and whether I'm actually paid or I'm volunteering, I go all out. It's just the way I am. So it was like kind of like a job. And I had been flipping houses before I came back from the States. And a friend's dad said he would bankroll me and somebody else to do that here. But I don't know if you remember the market 5 years ago was crazy. We had 30, 50 people turning up to auction at houses, and I'm like, the numbers did not make sense to me. So I thought I'm just not going to touch that with a barge pole. So yeah, the thing I miss, people do ask this, like, what do I miss about the States? I miss my friends. I miss
Yeah.
my connections. I miss Amazon shipping because literally this is kind of crazy. So you could literally order a toothbrush and it would be there that afternoon. Whereas when we got back, I ordered something on Amazon and it arrived 3 weeks later. And I'm like, this is so cool, right? Because we just make do with less stuff. So
Yeah.
it was really nice to leave, I think 70% of the US is propped up on retail, the economy. It was nice to leave all the stuff behind. And because we're so far away from everything, we just do with less of it, which means we're a lot more creative, got a lot more ingenuity, and we just stop and smell the roses, and it's more about the people. So
Yeah.
it's been really lovely in that way.
Yeah, and what I love there is, Mick, you speak about, everywhere, in America was the people, in New Zealand was the people, and it seems like people is something that really resonates with you. And, as you use the word, you playful out, which is what you said to me when I walked into the room there, just playful out. It seems to be your motto. Is that something
Mm.
that you resonate with, or is that something that you've learned over time?
Well, I could get into a couple of little stories about how I
Let's
got
go. Yeah,
there.
let's go.
Well, so I did all my schooling in New Zealand and went backpacking when I was 18 for 4 months and ended up going for 5 years, as you do. And up to the motherland and then sort of through Asia, etc. Came back to New Zealand, hung up my backpack, and started a job with a little company called Flight Centre that had 8 retail stores here at the time, teeny little company, and in retail. And I decided to go to Queenstown with a friend to do a bungee jump. And that was a moment in time that sort of changed my trajectory forever because I had, yeah, so we went to Queenstown, did the bungee jump. Amazing for have you guys
Yep, I
partaken?
have.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, right. The adrenaline rush is just insane.
Insane. Yep.
Walked away feeling like, God, I want more of that. That was so cool. Went to bed that night. I woke up a couple of hours later screaming. It was pitch black. I literally couldn't see in front of me, my hands in front of my face, and I didn't know where I was. It had turned out that I had literally slept, walked out of bed, out a second story window, and hit the
Wow.
ground so hard in a sitting position that I had crushed my spine.
Wow.
But the wacky thing about this was that 18 months prior, I'd had an accident, and a falling accident, the reason I was doing this bungee jump was to kill or cure the fear of heights that I had developed from that accident. So that whilst I'd never sleptwalked before, I had actually broken my back before. I had fallen just before I came back from backpacking. I'd slipped 50 feet into the bottom of a dry riverbed in central Australia. It was literally 130 k's west of Alice Springs, off the grid. And it had taken a really complicated 4 hour helicopter extraction and then a flying doctor's rescue down to the Royal Adelaide into a spinal unit. And I had fractured multiple bones all over my body. My skull was broken, my inner ear was broken a couple places, half my face was paralyzed, I had no hearing, my neck was broken in two places. And to give you an idea, it's your seven vertebrae and your the top of your spine. That's where most of the breaks happen that cause quadriplegia. And I had two of those broken, and I'd broken my pelvis in three places and an ankle. So this was a really, really crazy, the fact that I had broken my spine now, again for the second time in 18 months.
Yeah.
So there were so many learnings. So I don't know what you want me to unpack with that, but this
Oh,
connection with people, can I speak to that? Because
totally. Totally. Yes. Yeah.
this is my biggest learning. So when I was in the hospital in Australia, I was lying. So there were 12 beds. And at one point, they moved me to a room on the end because I was the only person that was not a quadriplegic and could still use the bell to ring a nurse when I needed. So 3 months pre-device, you spend a lot of time thinking. My mom getting that horrible call in the middle of the night, like, from the doctor. Serious accident. She's conscious right now. When can you come? Like the doctors really disagreed on whether I would hear and walk and speak and see properly again. There
Yeah.
was a lot of conflicting information. So I just used a lot of skills, internal skills that I had learned in my teens, a lot of visualization, a lot of meditation, things I had let go a little bit of to really try and heal myself as best I could when I realized, because I haven't severed my spine, I would be walking out of there. And I wanted it
Yeah.
to happen fast. So anyway, the other patients, I learned a lot through them. And what happened was the parents would go out and talk at the back, and their mum would come and feed me stories about how everybody was doing. And there was a kid in there who was only a couple of years younger than me. Name was Brent. He had an accident a couple of days after me. He'd come in the middle of the night, doctors and everything, bells, and he had come to. And he's like, "What's going on? What's going on?" They said, "You've been in an accident." He had been in a boy racer accident. His buddy had slammed the car into a wall so hard that
Wow.
and he was severed his spine. He was a quadriplegic. And when they told him he'd been in an accident and that's why he couldn't feel his legs, he's like, oh my God, that's going, that's it, I'm going. And he flatlined.
Wow.
And they brought him back. And then I heard him say to his mum, ask his mother, "Mum, can you lick my face?" So what that was all about was it was the only place he had any feeling. And he was a kid that was kind of like he'd been really depressed, long greasy hair, like kind of heavy metal. He was so disconnected from his life before the accident that he needed to connect with another human being. So the very raw and real stories that I was witnessing and hearing about in those 3 months they helped me to access deep levels of empathy I did not actually know I was capable of.
Yeah.
And it was, having to rely on nurses. I couldn't do anything for myself. I grew an appreciation for nurses that I never had anything to do with a hospital for. So what happened and then I just asked them lots and lots and lots of questions about how everybody was doing. And what I worked out, and this is what the science now supports, I've come to learn, is that when you access deep levels of curiosity, it cannot occupy your brain at the same time as fear.
Hmm.
This is such an important piece of information for all of us when we go into jobs, job interviews, networking events, hard conversations with bosses, girlfriends, boyfriends. Because if you stay in a space of curiosity, there's no fear. And so therefore courage shows up. And when you ask one question, kind of like what Tane was saying about going to the gym, it was so good you went to the gym because then you're more likely to go again and again and again and again and again, right? So that's what happens with you can compound your curiosity, you compound your ability to ask questions. And then what happens with curiosity and we ask questions of people, it allows us to connect, like Brent wanted to with his mother, right? Because as human beings, that's really what we want to do. We want to belong, and we do that through connection. So when, curiosity leads to connection, it takes care of fear, and it's our connections with each other that I've worked out is what makes the world go around. So later on, when I was doing some big negotiations, and I can tell you a little about my career journey, but when you can communicate fearlessly and with integrity and respect, gender doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're, speaking to a young person or an old person, or, when you can hold those things true, it just really means that the world's your oyster, I believe.
Yeah, what a beautiful story. And I say beautiful because in amongst all the tragedy that happened, there was lights. And I think, as you said with was it Brent? Was it Brendan? That young man, he just the languaging, I'm gone, and here the body just listens to that, right? It's the power of your words is so, so powerful. And I'm curious though, Vicky, about you mentioned you learned about meditation and visualization in your teens. Now, the reason I'm curious about that is because right now it's obviously a mainstream movement, but if we go back, 20, 30, 40 years, it was in the woo, it was woo woo world, right? Even if we go 10 years, people like woo, it was not a thing. So my curiosity is when you were in your teens, what made you go into that world there, which was not you wouldn't see it anywhere else. It's very, very specific, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I haven't really talked about this much, but I had this wacky little window when I was a teenager. I mean, I don't matter, what generation, being, what sex, being a teenager is hard. So between 15 and 17, I had three pretty big things happen. I ended up with my head like soup. So to share them with you kind of really briefly, I had at 14, my best friend became bulimic. And pre-divisive, it was very hard to get information about what that was, but I did know that this was not good. And she swore me to secrecy. And then the year later, when I was 15, my parents had a very sudden and very toxic divorce. And that's when divorce rates were back less than 10%. So it was
Yeah,
really, really funky, and it wasn't handled well. And my mother she's passed away since, but she had probably undiagnosed bipolar, and she was heavy drinking and taking Valium. So she would lose it on a daily basis. And for whatever reason, I'm one of four kids, but I was her confidant. And that was a place I didn't want to be. I had a lot of stuff in my head and trying to make sense of what was going on with my family. It was literally ripped apart and, thrown in opposite directions. And then I got my first boyfriend that summer. And he shared with me a couple of months in that he had been abused by an elderly neighbor for the last 6 years, who was paying him $100 a week to let him do things to him, which just was so tragic. And when I broke up with him, I couldn't handle
yeah,
that. He went on to commit suicide later. Um, so my head was soup. I just didn't know which way was up. And I actually went to our family GP, and he said, how you doing? And with the divorce, I didn't mention the other things. And I said, look, it's really tough. I wouldn't take my life, but I've thought about it. Like it's just, and he said, okay, we need to get you help. And then, unfortunately, what happened is he sent me off to a counselor who said to me, okay, everything you're telling me, and this was, I said, as long as we tell, my parents can't know, my brothers and sisters can't know, because that meant back then that you were kind of a bit cuckoo. And I knew they would sort of tease me shamelessly. So she said, we have to get your family involved. And I'm like, we can't do that.
yeah,
She assured me we should. So she said, I'll ring your parents, we'll talk. Crickets. Never called. To this day, I have no idea. Now, at the same time, my school counselor, who was my social studies teacher, pulled me aside and said, I heard your parents are divorcing. I'd like to bring you in for a chat to see how you're doing. And I was like, he was kind of like my last hope. And I was like, thank you, that would be great. And he never mentioned it again. So I would see him 3 times a week in social studies. And I'm in the class and my self-worth was so low at that point. I clearly thought it wasn't important enough. So I'm looking through the New Zealand Herald one day and I see this ad in the paper for self-transformation course. And it was like, do you want to be happy or do you want, I'm like, oh my God, like sign me up. So I went along and it was basically transcendental meditation. We did mattress bashing back then. I had actually had no idea how angry I was, particularly at my mother for whatever reason. So a lot of visualization and those skills really saved me. I came up for air for the first time and I'm like, wow, I think I'm going to be okay. I think I'm going to might be able to live a normal life. And what I started to do was meditate twice a day for 20 minutes. And so Einstein, a lot of those guys, they use this, right? Because you can get by on sort of 4 hours sleep a night. And so what I was doing, I just decided, like, you know what, I'm going to go traveling. I'm going to get the heck out of Dodge. So I took 3 jobs and was meditating twice a day for 20 minutes. I would go deep really fast. And so it just rejuvenated my brain. I was able to work all these jobs and I was still partying, things like that, and then save some money and off I went. So when I got into the hospital the first time, and obviously it happened again 18 months later,
Yeah,
use those tools. So I did a lot of meditating, a lot of creative visualization. I had also done a self-hypnosis course at that point. So I just imagined like some really good enzymes running around my bodies and heading to, those areas where the breaks were and just I visualized them being mended and knitted really tight. So they really worked because I defied doctor's prognosis twice. And with how well I would mend. And, Tani, I know you work in sports that they said you'll never run, you'll never ski, you'll never. And I've done all those things, including triathlons and things like that. So that's where the internal work, which now is so for example, the cool thing about our brains is that, with neuroplasticity, right? We've learned more about our brains in the last 10 years than when the previous hundreds put together, is that, it's never too late to teach an old dog new tricks. So, but what I do know about the brain is that motivation doesn't always show up when we need it. So
yep,
I talk about, automating your self-discipline and your self-care. So I decided about 5 months ago I would set my alarm for 5 o'clock in the morning, and I do that religiously. And then I click my fingers because you need the hands, the sound and the movement gets me out of bed, and I do a meditation and a self-hypnosis every single morning just to compound so that I am present and I'm making the most of my 100 years on the planet every single day, and I can show up with lots of energy. I work really long days and just really kind of like make the most of all the opportunities that just keep coming when you start going down those forks in the road of like meeting interesting people. That's how we met Prajesh, right? And
totally.
then just good stuff just keeps unfolding.
Yeah. Again, thank you for sharing that there. And I think what's really beautiful there, if we circle back, is, those three crucial moments in your life. Allowed you to see that advert in the newspaper. And if that didn't happen, the world would have a whole different story. If we think about the multiverses, there's another version of Vicky that's out there would not have read that and done that. They're a whole different story. But what I really love about this, Vicky, is that it's not just something you did when you're 16 or 17. It's something you're still doing right now because you see the power of it. And the reason I say that is because, I think about myself and maybe Tanya as well can jump in here is, you learn some pretty cool things when you're a teenager, and then life gets busy and just don't do it. You just don't do it at all. You just forget about it. And then later in your life, you go, oh, why did I stop doing it? Why did I stop? Because it was so good for me when I was young. But we get busy. We use it with quotation marks because it's not really busy, it's about priorities, right? We just shift our priorities and we shift it a little bit. Tanya, I'd love your thoughts as a younger person, especially what the change that you're going through right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right in terms of, some things that you forget about. And I think that's where I guess my passion for working with young people and helping young people really comes to play. I think it really, reminds me of things that I enjoy, things that I want to do. And I think you're right. I think especially I've probably noticed stuff over the last couple of years as I've graduated, there hasn't been not the same sense of enjoyment, but I think because you then move into the real world and in quotation marks, you lose that sense of going out and trying new things, and you kind of just get into that rhythm of, oh yeah, I go to work, I've got my weekends, I've got X Y Z, and I think it's been refreshing moving home, and my little sister's 14, almost 15, so stuff like that that really I guess reminds you to go out there, have fun, do different things that, and not put yourself into a box of it's just XYZ that you have to do and that's all you have to do. Hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's those crazy boxes, right, Vicky? Like boxes that people try and conform to.
Well, what I should add, like to this, speaks to Tane's, this autopilot that we find ourselves on, right? I think all of us do at times in our lives. And this first accident didn't really light me up. It was the second one when I had the sleepwalking accident. And I'll tell you why. So I was on autopilot. I was 23, so I was my first real job. And I was like, okay, so I was kind of, partying on Fridays and jogging on Saturdays and sleeping in on Sundays. And then when I had this accident, sleepwalking and bungee, and I ended up in Auckland Hospital. And I was like, and I don't know if you guys are spiritual, God, Buddha, coincidence, universe, but I really felt like someone was tapping me hard on the shoulder, like, dude, you did not get it first time. We are going around again. And I'm like, okay, like this is kind of scary because I couldn't work out what the message was. But I've used AI to give you an idea how lucky I am to be alive. AI says that I am 0.045% lucky to be alive, let alone walking. I'm not wheelchair bound. So when I had that second accident, I again lying in hospital, and here's what I'll say to you as well: like when we've got 10 minutes, what do we all do with it, right?
Yeah,
Uh, roll 2 to 3 kilometers a day now. And I will say that, our brains generate over 8,000 ideas every day. So law of averages says that every now and then one of them's going to be a good one. So they only sort of percolate and the manure works away in our brains if we stop to think, but we don't think like we used to. So that was the beauty of being ripped out of your life and having 3 months on my in hospital bed again. And I was thinking deeply about this and I got it. And my dad used to, sitting on my shoulder, you get 100 years on the planet, guys, if you're lucky, which is true. If we're lucky, you got to make the most of every one of them. And it kind of like that accident lit me up. And I just thought, you know what? Instead of asking kind of like the why me, I was like, why not me?
yeah,
And questions like, um, what am I meant to do with all this information? Like, what is the measure? Became like, as cliche as this might sound, it was accurate. This is the way I felt. Like, how do I leave the world a better place for me having been in it? What am I capable of?
yeah,
Like, I did the why me flip, and now I'm like, why not me? That's what I tell people to encourage you to ask, why not me?
yeah, 100%.
Got to lose, right? So now what I decided, my friend's telling I was talking to her recently. She said, do you remember you were 24 and you signed up for Toastmasters and you were quite shy and we were all pretty shocked. So I was like, you know what? I worked out I've got to get outside my comfort zone because no growth happens in
Yeah,
your comfort zone. Zero. It starts when you actually get to the edge and into it, right? So when I was leading an area, when I was in Flight Center, I'd become an area manager. We called our area the edge. And the quote I used to use was for the group was, if you're standing on the edge, you're taking up too much room. Move aside. Let somebody else go, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
go. Like, what are you waiting for? So I started taking the harder forks in the road. The company was, quite small, but they started offering goal setting and leadership courses. And I was like, yes, please. Yes, please. I started setting, sales goals and smashing those. Opened a new store, beat all the sales goal of the profit goals from startups, and then became one of the most profitable shops in the world. Like just, it was all about the way I was connecting with my team, meeting them where they all needed to be meted. So that I was kind of like on a freeway. I was just going, I'm just building on ramps, like, come, let's go as a team. This was one of the other things I would say that I've noticed coming back from the US. The US is like a barge. It is very hard to move the needle and the nose of a barge, but we are like a windsurfer here in New Zealand. We really are very snappy and whippy, but we forget that sometimes. Like Tani, you say, you hit your first job and you're like, oh God, now I feel like I'm here. Is this all there is? Or, like it's very easy for us in New Zealand and anywhere in the world. But just the perspective that I'm really fortunate to have, the David and Goliath perspective, being a dual citizen of the US and New Zealand, it's really interesting. I think in New Zealand, we've got to remember that like we're an amazing country. Like we were reminded at this event we went to, Rev'd, we've got a moat. We have a lot of ingenuity. We're really good people. We've got really hard work, good work ethic. We've got a lot to be really proud of. And so each of us has the capacity to leave the world a better place. And Kiwis, I mean, man, as far as sort of leading the world with integrity and all that kind of thing, we've got a lot going for us. So what happened after the accident, and then I started sort of engaging with a lot of these leadership and goal setting courses, and then I started applying for leadership jobs and getting them, and then I got started getting shoulder tapped, and I ended up going up to Canada, Toronto with the company for an expansion, and then I came back to New Zealand and had only been back a year, and the leader, the GM for New Zealand was going to be retiring, and I thought I'm going to try and position myself for that role, and then he called me in the office one day and said, "Hey, look, things are not going well with the startup in the US." It had been about 12 months. And I said, I'd heard that. And he said, "How would you feel about going up there and replacing the original president of the company in a turnaround capacity?" And, I was shocked because that was not what I thought he was going to ask me that day. Um, and I had this imposter syndrome going like, I could see it was like a train. It was starting to come. And I was like, boom. You know what? I'd had enough practice at that point that I was like, I'm not going to let that in the door. And so I just asked a lot of questions and I said, "When do you need an answer?" He said, "Tomorrow." And I said, "When would we leave?" And he's like, "Next week." And I'm like, "Okay, all right." So I knew I would say yes because I mean, how do you not say yes to an opportunity like that?
Yeah.
If somebody has enough belief in you and like, okay, they figure it. And so I went away and then I literally came back and said, "Yep, great." And so sold, car and rented a house and boom, on a plane and off we went. So what happened? This is where deep curiosity really helped me again. So I went up there without much of a roadmap. The company was is pretty relaxed in that way. There wasn't a lot of guidance, believe it or not. So I came in under the cover of dark, and then the gentleman that we were replacing, that was pretty rough. The CEO had to just like you literally got ripped out, and then here's Vicky,
Oh,
and
damn.
he ran to meet the stores. Pretty rough day for everybody. And I'm the bad boy on campus, right? So I remember they had a farewell get together. He did not come. Everybody else was there, including a lot of people he had brought from Australia with him. And I just bought the biggest card I could find. And I said, "Look," and I just got everybody to sign it. I'm like, "Look, I'm really, really sorry about this. But let's try and, help him understand what he's meant to you." And
Yeah.
the best I could. Then what I did is I got busy. So I went around and I met every staff member. There was about 45, and took each of them out for coffee. I got to work out what's going on here. And when I'd done that, I went around again and I met all 45 of them for coffees again. By that point, I worked out, okay, I think I know where the problems are. And so I went around and with various people, and instead of using my curious lens, I was seeking perspective. So I think what curiosity leads to is then you become a perspective seeker. Because when
Yeah.
you ask questions and you get somebody else's perspective, you have a new lens and you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So for all of us that are problem solvers, if we've got this issue in our life, this is where it is good to get other people's opinions, right? It's like, well, here's the problem, not necessarily about what I'm doing on my life, but if I ask Tane, if I ask you, I'm seeing this, Tane, how do you see it? And Pradesh, how do you see it? And then I see it. And then we become better problem solvers, right? Because we're like,
Totally.
oh, okay, so that's what I did. And then pretty much I had a roadmap. And then the company went in the next 2 years, took sales from $3 million to $27 million. So it was really successful, turning off taps, cutting the fat, getting rid of, unfortunately, freeing up the future is the term I like to use of people that were not the right people to be there. And we had a very successful turnaround. And then September 11 hit.
Mhm.
That was tough because 3 days there were no planes in the sky, which is, as you know, in America, it's just, in LA, X-Men has been there. I mean, there's multiple planes coming every minute, like they're
Yeah.
taking off. Surreal, very, very, very surreal. I've never, you wouldn't, when you look at the US right now and how polarized it is, on that particular day, that particular moment, there were American flags everywhere. I was caught up in just the pride, the immense pride, the way people really helped each other out, and the heart and empathy people had. It was very, very moving. And so yeah, and then so that's kind of like my journey up to how I ended up in the US, and then I met my now husband, and so does that sort of
Hi.
give you an
Yeah. What I love about that is there's so many touch points there, but a lot of emotion as well. And again, you said before that you're playful out, and everything you've said so far is you've been playful out. Just taking on the opportunities, just saying yes. And what I love is I always get into trouble in my workplace people always ask me why didn't I do some stuff, and I'm always like, why not? My answer is always why not? And they're like, we asked you why. I was like, yeah, but why not? My answer is why not? So I have two questions I always ask. One of them is why not, and the other one is what's the purpose? Those are the two questions I always ask in every single meeting that I have with anyone. And people get frustrated because like, why are we doing this if we don't need to do it? What's the purpose? And also why not? And why we're not doing it. And if you have a good answer, that's great. But if you have a good answer, then there's no answer. It's not an answer, right?
I love that projection. So I do something called the theory of opposites, which is very similar. Like, so if you're going up to, say, the US and you're going to open a business and you look at like research, how do New Zealand businesses succeed going into the US? It's like, well, I tend to look at why don't they work?
Yeah,
That's where the gems are. All of my really big learnings, and certainly when I went on to flipping houses, is like where I lost money, that's where the gold was. So I
yeah,
think this whole idea, we all know it, right? Because the with athletes will tell us time and time again, we've got to fail. The more times, how many shots did I practice that didn't get in
yeah,
to to get the three pointers when it really counts. So, but it's really hard to fail. So I do a lot of work around fear and feeling the fear of other people's opinions, I think is really a problem. And it's becoming more of a problem with our digital culture. And I
yeah,
call it digital candy
mhm,
that we like to eat, partake in every day,
yeah,
because I think that the way people are showing up after they've been scrolling for 2 to 3 kilometers a day, and obviously not necessarily all in one sitting, is that we put our devices down, sorry, while we're scrolling. And if we're commenters or we like, or some people will put, comments that are really positive and some people will put some that are pretty disparaging, but we are in a position of power and influence when we're scrolling and we're observing people's work. Considering only 1 to 2% of people on the planet are actually posting, it's really interesting. And a lot of us are observers, but we have a lot of opinions. When we put our devices down and then we rock up to face, projection tane, we're in a position largely of judgment.
yeah,
We can't remember. And so people are asking less questions. They just assume they know what's going on. And that's a problem for us as Kiwis, but also people all around the world.
yeah,
Because they're asking what if, they're not asking why not. And they're not, why not me or why me? Like those are the important things because it's stopping us from connecting
yeah.
with each other. The US, did you hear this? Like last year, the Surgeon General declared a loneliness epidemic.
Yes, it did. Yeah, it was what a powerful letter he wrote. It was amazing.
Yes, okay, you know what I'm speaking about,
Yeah,
and isolation epidemic. So we
yeah,
have been more connected with devices, yet people have never been so lonely. Think about my foot poor friend Brent, who wanted his
yes,
mother to face. He wanted to be connected to another human being. With all the digital candy and all the devices we have, we should be so connected, yet we're being torn apart.
yeah,
This is why AI is going to mean that leaders and sports is going to be so important because we will be a lot of meetings and things will be digitized and robotic and things like that, right? That's just the reality and call it decades from now. But as humans, our need to help people feel seen and connected and valued will be ever so important. And here's the interesting thing. I teach a grace method of the 5 things that each of those letters stands for. Women do 4.5 of them very, very well. Men do 1.5. And so I
mhm,
think that what comes naturally for women, which is the soft skills, um, are just going to be called skills.
yeah,
So I think there's going to be something that, as this evolution we're sort of going through around, right, as well about women's empowerment and things like that, is that, I think it's becoming clear we don't know a lot about each other's brains and how we operate so and see things so differently. So one of the reasons that I doubled down on women was on the night of the Trump got in the second time, and it's mainly because of his rhetoric, right?
yeah,
Uh, but the world is led by 90% men at the top and 10% female. 12% of research in AI is done by women. So it gives you an idea when women are 50% of the planet, the maths is not great.
yeah,
Because we end up with another disproportionate representation and products even.
yeah,
So, it's interesting. My company and I is called the Grow Zone layer, because it represents that place in our brains where life is 10% what happens to us, and it butts up against 90% how we respond to it.
Yeah.
because that slice is where all the magic happens, all the work happens, all the work, Tane, that you're doing and Prajesh that you guys do with people, right? That's where the growth happens because we can't do anything about the 10%, but we ruminate a lot about that.
Totally. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time there. So I help with this whole rumination piece and what does our brain say we can do about that? Um, and for women, my goal is to get them ready, to get them to the front of the pack for the next leadership opportunity so that we start to sort of balance the scales a bit because the world right now could use with a little more balanced leadership style in the mix. And not all women, not all men, but just balanced, just so we have better representation and therefore that perspective that women can bring, we get better results, we get better products.
Yeah.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think, perspective matters because, as you said before, we all see the same thing, but we see it differently.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm just smiling because when I jumped on, I said, "Oh, there's green everywhere." But if someone's colorblind, they will not see the green. But I'm assuming my assumption is that because we all have these assumptions, right? Am I seeing what everyone else is seeing? So, the whole perspective thing is really, something that I really love as well. But one thing that really shifted my thinking as well when it came to fear and imposter syndrome and all that was somewhere I read or maybe heard was that everyone has an opinion whether you like it or not. And that made me think, I was like, actually, that's right. It doesn't actually matter. Everyone have an opinion, whether it's good or bad. If the minute I jumped on here, you'd have an opinion. Doesn't matter what it is. When you're walking on the street, a stranger's gonna have an opinion. When you're running, it doesn't actually matter. And the minute I learned about that, I was like, actually, this is very true. It empowered me totally because so often we try to control other people's opinions when we actually cannot do that there. And
Yes.
so it's very powerful that you said that there, that it's that opinion piece of the judgment, that imposter syndrome that we have because we tell ourselves a story. The inner critic keeps coming up.
Yes. Well, it's also right. Like we all have 100 billion neurons in our brains.
Yeah,
And so when no one has our lived experience, that's why everyone has a story if you take the time to listen. Because, we all went to different primary schools, potentially in different countries.
yeah, definitely,
So
definitely.
so we grew up with different parents. We grew up with different numbers of siblings. We grew up with different teachers. From when you're around 4 or 5 years old, that's when you typically have your first experience of realizing that other people are aware of you. And
Yeah,
for a lot of us, it happens in our first day of school.
yeah.
It may happen for me. I can story if you want. And I've been asking recent people recently, you might like to do this. Do you remember your first day of school? Do you guys remember your first day of school? No.
Tane?
No, I guess the only thing I really remember is my best mate. We were buddied up, and I came in, halfway through the year because I'm a May baby. So, yeah, that's probably all I remember, but not too, yeah, not specific
So
detail.
he was buddied up with you. You remember his name,
Keenan, yeah, we're still good friends. Yeah,
right? Did he like put his hand up and say, "I'll be Tane's buddy"?
I don't know if it was a put his hand up or a volunteer thing, but
See, that's cool. He had an impact on you. It's so
mm,
cool. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I can't remember my first day at primary school, but I remember my first day at a new secondary school, and it's etched into my memory, etched, because it was a brand new school, and so I'll go back a little bit. So I grew up in Zimbabwe and went to primary school in Zimbabwe. Don't remember that. Oh, I remember a bit of it. So we went to then high school, no, sorry, primary school. We had a government school, and my very good friend one day didn't come to school, and I was like, "Oh, where did he go?" So my mum called his mum. Was like, "Oh, where's Nanesh?" And she was like, "Oh, we've put him into a new school." And then they're like, "Oh," and they're like, "Oh, you should come to this new school. It's really great." So my mum and my dad had a bit of a conversation, and then we transferred to a new school. And I have to. Kudos my parents because it was further away from where we lived. Like the school I was going to was basically walking distance, and now we had to drive out there. It was really far away. I was going to government school. This is now private school, very, very different. So they had to sacrifice a lot for us to get there. Anyway, this school was just being built. So we were the first senior year, and they were just building every year as you go on. So we're still in construction. And I remember day one, when I got there, and um, the first thing that somebody they gave me a nickname first day. Hi, we're gonna call you. What's your name? Prajesh? No, we're not gonna call you Prajesh. We're gonna call you Budgie. And I was like, what? That was it. That was it. Man, that was my nickname for ever. Like the bird Budgie. Anyway, so that stuck for my whole life really until I came to New Zealand when it all changed. Then I remember this blatantly on day one, the teacher was like, do not, and I repeat, do not go where the construction site is. Do not go there. And I met these friends who were pretty naughty at that time, and they're like, hey, Prajesh, do you want to be part of us? Let's go into this construction zone area. So what did I do? This is day one. This is day one in a brand new school. So off I went into this construction zone area. Now, for some context as well, when we say construction, it was all bush. It was all basically bush. Go into there, walking around, and we walk into basically snakes everywhere, and we're like, "Ah." Anyway, we're screaming and shouting. Go back to class, and the teachers find us, and I just get destroyed on day one. And my parents get a call going, this is day one. What is your son up to? We still have the ability to not let you come to school, and that is etched into my memory for years and years. Now, let me just also harking back to that bit. The name of that school was called Masia Pambili. Today, my coaching company is called Pambili Coaching as a hark back to where I came from. So that is definitely an itch in my memory, but also Masia Pambili means let's go forward, and Pambili Coaching stands for moving forward. So your question, Vicky, is it's a moment in time that has come through and has stayed with me my whole life.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Yeah, it's interesting because I remember my first day of school as a middle child. So I was number three of four, and I had two brothers, brother and a sister at primary school, and a younger one at home. And being the middle, everything I wore and played with was a hand-me-down. So going to school for the first time, and I was busting excited about this. I was just really busting. And in the 70s, you turn up the day you turn five. So this is a really big milestone for everybody, right? So I was pumped. And it meant I was going to get my own teacher, I was going to get my own classroom, going to get my own friends. And what mum bought for me was my own orange lunchbox. This plastic thing that had such a firm click. You open it up, had a compartment for the sandwich and the mandarin and the snacks. It was like, but the click, it was like this was a quality product. So first day comes, I get to take my lunchbox. I was stoked, sit down, and then the bell goes, and it's the first time to eat. And so I was stoked, grabbed my orange lunchbox, went outside, clicked it open. I pulled out my sandwich and I'm nibbling away. And this boy walks up to me as he walks by and he points at me and he just starts laughing his head off. He's like, she's eating her sandwich and it's only morning tea time. And he just starts laughing. And the kids started joining in. And I was just, 50 years later, this has stayed with me. I had no concept of like what kind of mortal sin, how much gravity there was attached to this. Was I going to be excluded from the tribe? But it was really like it really had impact. So I think for me, and my 100 billion neurons, this was my very first moment in time where I realized that somebody else was aware of my situation. So 3 days later, Wendy Matthews came into the classroom and they said, would anybody like to be Wendy Matthews' buddy? And my hands shot up so fast. So I looked after Wendy Matthews and we stayed friends for a very long time. I was making to make sure she didn't fall into the same trap that I had. So yeah, it's really interesting, like the how we respond and how we grow. But up to about the age of 8, and I know you talk about this, Prajesh, all our belief patterns and behavior systems through those kinds of little experiments determine how we see the world and whether
Yeah.
we're judgmental of others, right? Or whether we're kind and caring. And that is also compounded by what our experience is with our siblings and our parents. And here's the thing though, we're born with fear of heights and fear of loud noises. Everything else, including fear of other people's opinions, that stops us putting our hands up to speak up in meetings, is learned behavior.
Yep.
And the really good news about that is that we can unlearn it or we can create new neural pathways. And that's what I help women with. Particularly, I find that women are waiting for almost like permission just to go. Like just, yeah, to get your hand up. And that's what I really work on catalyst, being a catalyst for people. I don't like people to work with me forever. I'm not into that
Yep.
sort of. I want
Yep.
you to, I want to hit you like I want to get the shovel underneath you. I don't want to, and off you go and spark you so that you take that harder fork in the road and you go and live your big life.
Yeah, and I love that because a lot of coaches that we know want people to be with them forever. It's like this, what are you doing? If they're with you forever, you're not doing a job. You're not doing a job. You need to let them go and grow and do their thing. And I love the fact that you do that with women. And it's beautiful seeing I've been following you for a while in LinkedIn, and I just love the way you've navigated and shifted your focus just to be front and center. Hey, women, this is my jam, and why aren't you, as women, putting up your hands to do things because you're pretty epic. And again, I read something somewhere where someone said, I don't, he's like, I don't understand why there's all this gender stuff because he goes, if there were no women, you wouldn't exist. And I was like, this is so true. Like, if there were no women, they would not exist. He put this question to somebody who was anti-women and blah 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 blah. And he was like, hey, if your mom did not exist, you would not be here. So how do you answer that question? And he couldn't say anything. He was just because that is a fact. It is not an opinion. It is a fact. And yeah, yeah,
So, I'm a mum of two boys, right? And so my job is to raise them to be really good human beings. And so at some point they cross over the threshold from, being under the in the nest to living out life out there. And as does every man. And what happens, or when does it happen that some of those men become less supportive of women or quick to jump on the bandwagon and be a little bit demeaning or um, assume, not promote them over a guy that's just more one of the bros? Or what's happening? When does that happen, and how does that happen, and why does that happen? What do you guys think about that?
yeah. I'm going to bring Tane into this because Tane has been doing lots of work in women's rugby as a male, and he's had lots of challenges in that space, but also seen the growth. Tane.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting concept and something that I've probably resonated since jumping into that coaching space. And it's been interesting to see, I guess, particularly in that sports environment where the narrative is starting to change, the momentum's starting to change with more female athletes and that transition into more professionalism with that. And so I think, yeah, I think you're right. I think there's still obviously a lot of challenges that females have, both in terms of, for my example, with sport, but also leadership in that space. But also, I think there are, or there is growth, there is progress in those spaces as well, and that's been, I guess, I've really resonated with since when I started in that space to, I guess, the last couple of years. Passing comments. The other week I went to the Taranaki women's rugby game, and there's an old couple of mates that were, they're like, "Oh, it's so good to come and watch the women's rugby. It's better than the men's game." And if you think 5, 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't have heard many of those comments unless it was somebody who had a daughter or a daughter's friend, or somebody that they knew in the team, to actually have those supportive and constructive conversations. So I think there's definitely been a huge momentum shift, but I think you're right in terms of, yeah, how do we, I guess, open that bigger conversation as well to continue to progress.
Hmm. I mean, I think the needle's moving, and yeah, pressure, Prajesh, sorry, I jumped in. I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, no, this is it's really hard. Like this is hard for me to answer that question, Vicky, because all my life my mom has been my role model, and um I've been very lucky that a lot of my grandmother was my first role model. Then my mother said to me, women have always been really empowering. It's seeing what women can achieve has never been a if not a maybe. It's just normal to me. It's just normal. So to answer that question is I don't understand how some other people cannot see that. And I guess that's because of the way I was raised. And as you said before, we're all raised in different opinions and different rhetorics. And there might be households where this is anecdotal. This is really anecdotal. There might be households where the father figure puts down the mother figure, and you learn from that, and the young person learns from that, and they might just, okay, cool, we've seen this happening, and I see this happening in lots of Southeast Asian cultures, where where it's a male society, and you will see that. When I was teaching my program yesterday, there was a lady who's so qualified. She's got a PhD. And she shared a story that when she was married and had a second child. She was away nursing her child, breastfeeding the child, and the mother-in-law came and said, "What are you doing here? You need to go and look after the guests. That is your job." And she's like, "But I'm feeding my child." And no, in our society, in our world, your job is to go and give the guest and greet the guests. So, it's interesting because it might be a cultural thing. It might, well, when I say cultural, I'm going to put them in quotation marks because it's we use the word culture as an excuse when it could actually just be just behaviors that we have accepted as normalized. It could be individual. So, it's really hard for me to answer the question because, if you ask someone else a question that has been raised in an environment where women have
Yeah.
been put down all their lives, they'd give you a different answer.
I saw this super interesting video. It was I think it was Jessica Chastain, and she was being interviewed, actress, and she said there was a young actress in Hollywood whose father was involved in the business too. I think he was a producer, and he had been telling his daughter, just if you ever get, the sort of the casting couch and all that, which if you ever get hit on, if you ever like just fight like a wild bobcat, basically. And she sort of turned to him and said, why are you telling me to look after myself? Can you just go and talk to the guys and tell them just to stop being
Stop.
cr-"
Yeah.
And I was like, God, that's right.
Yeah.
So
That's
I
right.
think things are shifting. It's like that's a perspective, right?
Yeah.
Um, anyway, I mean, I just think that um, it's just such an interesting time on our planet. And I think what I've come to realize is that we don't understand, even with our health, we don't understand much about men's health and women's health, let alone each other's health. Even I was talking to my husband about it. He's like, I've sent him a couple of it. He's like, oh my God, I had no idea, what goes on. And I think so. It's just being curious. It's just being on that learning curve, and it's not judging people for what they do and don't know. It's, hopefully I guess it comes down to proximity, the people we choose to spend time in the company of, and elevating our game and just like, being good human beings and being a good, role model. When I was up in the States, I felt like I was almost ambassador for Kiwis, right? I felt, I to a certain degree I wanted to represent well. I'm not sure if we all feel like that when we travel, but I think we can just have, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm the same as well. When I travel, I mean, it's really funny because I have lots of hats. I'm from Zimbabwe. I am Indian city. I live in New Zealand. So I'm like, which one am I representing? I was like, it doesn't actually matter. Just be a good human and be a good person. And if they talk about New Zealand, you level up New Zealand. If they talk about Zimbabwe, you level up Zimbabwe. If they talk about, and you haven't lived there, but you can put, you level it up, as opposed to putting it down because it's so easy to put things down. Always easy to put things down. It's hard to level up. I have an exercise that I do when I do my team coaching, and I get people to do an exercise where they just talk about positive behaviors. They have a list of negative behaviors and positive behaviors, and they're like, "Oh, we want to do negative behaviors." Like, no, no, because that's the most easiest thing. Let's focus on positive behaviors, and people really struggle because it's easy to talk about negative behaviors, but the positive ones again because people get called out or they're shy. They're like, "Oh, is it okay for me to say that as a positive behavior or not?" And it's really it's such a crazy cool exercise that they run. Tanya, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I always try and represent New Zealand the best I can. I haven't had too much travel experience, but the experience I have had, yeah, I try and represent, I guess, myself and my family, the best I can.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
one of the things that I'm doing, speaking about travel, I would, if any of your listeners or you guys can help me with this, is I'm doing something I'm calling Campaign 195, and it's around women and getting more women to the front of the pack. And because imagine what we could learn if we could ask one question to a woman in every country in the world, the same question. And so the question that I'm asking is, why do capable women in leadership still hesitate sometimes to raise their hands and speak up? Because there was a study from KPMG that showed that 70% of high performing women in corporate will still choose to remain silent sometimes. So the quality of the feedback of the people I'm getting that are responding is really incredible. Like giving perspective from culturally, like so I've got one from a woman in Mexico, and she's given me some perspective around sort of machismo and that's so I'm not sure how big this will get, but at the moment my goal is 31 December. So if anybody knows a woman in leadership they could introduce them to me, I would email them, or I can send you an email to send somebody so that they can respond. So I'm in the middle of connecting, gathering all this data because, freedom of speech is really different around the world. Um, but when it comes to speaking up, it appears to be a universal problem for women.
Yeah.
And the world would be better place if we had more women speaking up and sharing their ideas and their solutions and suggestions.
Project 195, can you, I know we've been going on over an hour, but that's okay. I'm going to ask you this question here. What was the inspiration behind Project 195? What inspired you? Because, it's really powerful and also double-ended question, double-barrel question, and also what led you to come up with the question, that very specific question?
Mm. Well, so I have a bigger vision, which maybe we could talk about another time, but it's really perspective, sharing perspective at a global level. So creating a network for that. And so I'm always, because I consider again, this might sound a little cheesy, but my license plate in the US says citizen of the world, because I think that that is how I see myself, how we see all of us. And I want us to be more connected. And so that's where I have real interest in connecting. And I just think the perspectives we will learn from, Vatican is the tiniest city, and I've found a woman there, but
Oh,
not a lot of them. But imagine that perspective, and obviously somebody in Afghanistan or Iraq, Iran, so different to life in New Zealand, right? And so for me, it'll just be fascinating. I've actually got some hypotheses, which I've written down. I've got four, and I want to test them against what I get. And already I've noticed some interesting trends that are happening, which I'm really happy to share. I'm eager to share. So whether this becomes social media snippets or a book or just sharings, but I think my goal is to help young women in leadership. That is my ultimate goal with the information that I get from this.
I love it. I love it. And information. There's lots of information out there. Information galore. We draw on information, and as you said before, digital candy. But I think the key is what we do with information is the knowledge, and the fact that you're asking this question here is information that has been distilled to knowledge, which can then be used to help young women or anyone who identifies as female. That hey, this is the way, or the way forward, and leadership is not defined to a specific gender. It
Mhm.
shouldn't be defined. Yeah. Vicky, we've been chatting for over an hour now, which is great, and we can keep talking and talking, and because you have such a fascinating life story. Um, but the interest of time, and also we can get you back again. We're going to ask you our final question, and this is the question we ask every single guest on our podcast. Our podcast is called Baskets of Knowledge, and every episode we invite our guests to share a piece of knowledge to put into our baskets. You've shared a lot. But now we want you to just listen to one piece of information to put into our kitty. And this can come from any aspect of your life.
Yeah, that's really hard. I think I'm going to go with that quote. If you're standing on the edge, you're just taking up too much room. Like, just go. What are you waiting for? You've got nothing to lose. Or move aside if you're not ready and let somebody else go, right? So that's the incentive. Just go. So if you're standing on the edge, you're taking up too much room.
Yeah, if you're standing on the edge, you're taking up too much room. So you've got two choices, either jump or let someone else take over. Beautiful. Beautiful. Love it. Tana, any last words?
I guess just a massive thank you to Vicky for the knowledge you've shared, the emotion, the passion you've shared. It's been inspiring to hear just I guess a snippet of your story. Really,
Cool. Thank you for having me, guys. This has been a pleasure.
No worries. Thank you, Vicky. So, I'm just going to summarize this very quickly. At the start, I said, we're very honored to have you on because that connection was really beautiful. And what always stood out for me was playful out. And what I've noticed in your whole story, in everything from your accidents, accident number one, accident number two, from flight center, from what you're doing right now, is you're playing full out in every single thing that you're doing, which is really beautiful. And the fact that, the edge doesn't exist in your world because you're flying all the time off that edge there and doing some pretty cool things is really, really, really inspiring, not just to myself and to Tiny, but hopefully to all our listeners out there. So thank you so much for sharing the tiny bit of your story there. It's even less than 0.45%. It's even less than that there. So one day we'll get to 1% of your story, which is going to be beautiful. Um, Till next time, our listeners, please look after yourselves. Please smile, and don't forget to put something into your boss's knowledge. And as Vicky says, if you're on the edge, step away or jump over. Till next time, ka kite rori. Bye. Peace.
thank you for listening to Baskets of Knowledge.
Yeah, we hope that you found something useful to put into your basket of knowledge. And as we said before, remember to put something little into your baskets of knowledge every week. And as always, feel free to like, comment, and share this podcast. Thanks, everybody. Bye.